So I did a fairly lengthy video on my favorite main characters and protagonists of the Cosmere recently. But if you know anything about Brandon Sanderson, you'll know that he doesn't just write main characters well. Brandon makes sure that the whole Cosmere is littered with other types of characters, all written well in their own way. So today I'll be looking at my favorite Cosmere villains. Now, in the sake of keeping this equal, I won't be adding any shards to this list. Don't get me wrong though, shards are certainly very interesting forces in the Cosmere, but including them feels a bit unfair to the other characters. And in all fairness, Brandon Sanderson has written quite a few villains that aren't shards, and I feel that they all deserve a bit more time in the limelight. And as I said in my previous video, I highly encourage you all to put your own lists of your favorite Cosmere villains in the comments below. Anyway, I don't want this video to stretch on as long as the previous one, so let's get straight into it. Bluefingers. Bluefingers is a villain from the Warbreaker novel, and to be honest, he almost didn't make this list. Now, I did enjoy the fact that he ended up being a twist villain, and I honestly didn't see his betrayal coming. But in all honesty, I was not really a fan of him as a villain overall. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he's a poorly written villain. I'm just saying that compared to the others on this list, and based on what I personally enjoy in a villain or antagonist, he falls a bit short. In my opinion, his reveal was a bit rushed, and we didn't really get to see and personally understand his motivations either. But I will give credit where credit is due and say that Bluefingers is definitely a fairly well done twist villain. And whether he's as good as the others or not, he did make it on the list and deserves his number 10 slot. Sethventure. Sethventure is a villain I love to hate, and by the time you've finished reading Well of Ascension, you probably feel the same way. Seth is the father of Elend and a really despicable person. From abusing his children to psychologically manipulating Zane and being willing to destroy his son's kingdom and kill Elend if he got in his way. Seth is the kind of character you read and realize that yes, humans can be really scummy and disappointing. And that's why I enjoy him. He's a villain with not a lot of deep motivations for us to see, sure, but he's enough of a scumbag for us to rally behind the heroes and cheer for his failure. So that's why I'd give Seth the number 9 spot on this list. Nail. Nail is a herald on Roshar, and by the time the final desolation comes around, he is far beyond insane. But he's not the kind of insane that makes you erratic or unpredictable. He's the kind of insane that allows him to make cold and calculating decisions but execute your plans in the most horrendous and brutal ways possible. Nail is the embodiment of the law and follows it to the letter, but at the same time he will unflinchingly kill a young boy for merely stealing from someone. Nail is a villain I enjoy not because he has some grand master scheme or because he has some great character arc, at least not yet until the latter half of the Stormlight series. He's a villain I enjoy purely because he gives us a window into the mind of a man who will kill mercilessly for his own twisted principles. Nail feels genuinely dangerous whenever he's in a scene, and you never know when he might just decide to direct his power and ruthlessness against the character you love. Absolutely a fun villain and my number 8 pick. Dilaph. Dilaph is the rabidly anti-Elantrian priest we meet in Elantris, and while I initially thought he was a very two-dimensional villain, I discovered it was quite the opposite. We learned that Dilaph brought his dying wife to the Elantrians for healing despite his religion absolutely condemning the use of their magic. He went against his own principles and teachings to save the life of the woman he loved. And then when the Elantrians failed to save her, he was consumed by his hatred of them. He made it his life mission to erase them from the world. So when we finally learn that this man with a seemingly irrational hatred of the Elantrians and the surrounding kingdoms had a very real and personal reason for feeling that way, he instantly became a much deeper villain in my opinion. I would have liked more exposition on him as a villain, but what we did get was very well executed and solidly earned him the number 7 spot on this list. 10th. Denth is probably one of the best twist villains Brandon Sanderson has done. When we first meet Denth and Tonkfa, his companion, I fully thought that he was the stereotypical mercenary with a heart of gold, and then he suddenly wasn't. Now, I'm not usually someone who enjoys overplayed and overdone tropes, but when they're done well, I can definitely appreciate and admire the execution. This is exactly the situation with Denth. I fully bought into the idea that he was indeed a good guy, and when his betrayal came, it not only seemed a genuine betrayal, but also seemed inevitable in its own way. I wasn't stuck in disbelief, I just immediately realized that Brandon genuinely managed to pull one over on me, and I accepted that Denth was always a scumbag. Well, perhaps always is a bit harsh, we don't know his full backstory, but hopefully in the Warbreaker sequel we'll get a bit more insight into his backstory as well. I also think that Denth's motivations for hating Vasher was quite believable, and I hope that in addition to the Warbreaker sequel we get, perhaps we can get some kind of novella explaining the history behind Vasher and Denth and all the other scholars from all those centuries past. Definitely one of my all-time favorite twist villains and number 6 on this list. The Lord Ruler. So, the Lord Ruler was very much a typical evil overlord in the Final Empire, and he seemed the perfect example of a Dark Lord. But then we learned more about his history in the later 2 books. I already did a video on why the Lord Ruler wasn't necessarily evil, but rather ruthlessly practical. Now when I said that, I'm not saying his acts weren't absolutely horrendous and evil acts, but I'm saying that he didn't start out as a man who wanted to just rule the world and perform those acts out in a selfish personal desire. Rashek, as he was once called, did what he believed would be the best for the survival of humanity, and he made the hard decisions to do what he had to do in order to preserve the human race. Regardless of what you believe of the Lord Ruler's actions and motivations, I think this is a very good example of how to craft an evil villain with deeper motivations behind their choices than most would have expected. A solid villain, and definitely has to be in my top 5. Rathan. Rathan is one of my all-time favorite villains from the Cosmere as a whole, and if any of you saw my video on the subject, you'll understand why. I'm a sucker for good character progression, and Rathan provides this in spades within the pages of Elantris. In fact, he provides this more than any of the other characters in the entire book. Rathan is a man that worked his whole life to further the expansion of his religion, and he did so because he believed it was the right thing to do. And then, when he saw the internal forces that influenced his church to become a twisted form of what it should be, he had to overcome his own personal biases to fight against Dilaph. I won't go into it too much since I already did that whole video, but I honestly think that Rathan should be seen as a prime example of how to do a morally grey villain with a beautifully executed character arc. Absolutely my number 4 on this list, and well deserved as well. Taravangian. Taravangian is probably a villain we'll come to remember for generations to come, and Brandon Sanderson has managed to craft him perfectly for the role. Taravangian's whole arc was beautifully executed. He starts as a kindly king who wants nothing more than to care for and save his people in the coming desolation. He begs cultivation for the capacity to save his people and help them survive what is to come. And through her influence, he not only becomes a ruthless villain in the background with his incredibly complex schemes, but he also manages to kill Race and take the Shard of Odium upon himself. The whole arc was so well done, and Taravangian is undoubtedly one of the top villains Brandon has ever written. And since he only became a Shard at the end of Rhythm of War, he technically isn't a Shard for the duration of his arc thus far. Just wanted to clear that up before someone in the comments mentioned how I said I wouldn't do Shards for this video, so gotcha there. But I'd like to do a whole video on Taravangian once his arc is completed, since I can only imagine what kind of crazy things will happen in Stormlight 5 and further on in the series. I absolutely love this villain, and he solidly earns the number 3 spot for me. Robonio. Robonio was written primarily for the story arc in Rhythm of War, and we probably won't really see her again except in later Herald flashbacks. But her single appearance in the latest Stormlight book has solidified her as a top tier villain in my opinion. From the outset, we as the readers can tell that she's different from all the other fused. She's clearly very intelligent and powerful, but she's also tired and weary from millennia of unending war. We get to know her intimately in the latest book, and we get to see the kind of sacrifices she's had to make over the eons. Even her daughter's mind was completely unhinged, and she was forced to make the ultimate sacrifice to relieve her child's pain and suffering. We see a very deep side to this fused's mind and past, and I'm sad we won't get to see more of her later on, at least in any form other than a flashback. I think I share this sentiment with the community as well, since I've seen quite a few people express their love for this amazing character. Robonio is a villain that, had circumstances been different, could easily have been on our side instead of the enemy. A very well developed character and absolutely my number 2 pick. Moash. I don't think Brandon Sanderson has ever crafted a villain that's created as much of a divide in the fandom as he has with Moash. Moash is a character that we at first believed would be one of the main characters and a close friend of Kaladin for a long time, but who eventually fell off the path of righteousness and started working against his former friends. The betrayal turned a lot of readers against him, and his subsequent actions in Rhythm of War turned him into the ultimate pariah of the Cosmere community. And while some of us have taken a more measured and calmer look at him as a character, a lot of the fandom are frothing at the mouth to see him get what's coming to him. Regardless of where you stand on the matter of Moash, I don't think anyone can disagree with him being one of the best villains Brandon has written. I did my own video examining Moash and why he made the decisions he did, and I highly recommend you check it out. Moash is an amazingly well written antagonist and villain, and I can't really see anyone ever replacing him as my all-time favorite Cosmere villain. But as I always like to say, these have all just been my opinions. What would your list look like? The same as mine, or am I just completely off my rocker? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I really do appreciate it. My name has been Raven, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.